Bio 245, this is Vanessa again, and we're going to talk about blood vessels. And I'm going to give you an opportunity right now to pause this video because these guys are all labeled up, and we posted pictures as well for you guys to look at. So I would recommend, if you don't have those pictures with you, either printed out or up on your screen or something, I'd recommend pausing so you can get those pictures and have them next to you. So I'll give you a second and just kind of wait. So that way nothing's overlapping. Okay, so hopefully you have your pictures. Ideally they'd be printed out just so that way you can also watch me on the screen, and I'll be pointing at vessels as we go. In fact, I'm going to scoop this up as much as I can. Alright, so you can see that we have two basic kinds of boards here. We have the white boards that are kind of more three-dimensional and fancy, and we have this guy, I always call him the 70s board because he looks like he's from the 70s, but you know, it's a screen board. Now, these boards have some vessels present and some stuff missing, so it's very important that you know the difference and know which one has what, because I could put either of these types on the practicals or quizzes or what have you. So the more that you can look at right away at a model and be like, oh, that one doesn't have the femoral vein, so I'm going to be okay. I don't need to be able to identify that. Then the better off you're going to be when you're trying to write down a correct answer. All right. So the way that I generally do this is I start at the heart and I work out. So usually I do this with the arteries, start at the heart, work out. Because remember, all that blood is going through the heart. In fact, you can really nicely see the chambers on here. You can't see my face, but I guess that's okay. So you can see, again, here's our chambers, our right atrium, our right ventricle. The ventricle can pump out through that pulmonary artery. That blood will swish around the lungs, come back via the pulmonary veins into the left atrium, go down to the left ventricle. The left ventricle can squish and send that blood out through the aortic semilunar valve, and then so starts our journey, right? So we're going to start talking about the arteries. I don't want to block. Okay, hopefully this. Okay, so we're going to start off with arteries just because that's, I don't know, that's just where I like to start. Okay, so first things first, we have our aortic semilunar that goes into the aorta, and so you've already learned a couple of these terms. I just need to scoop this up closer. Sorry, I want you guys to actually be able to see and follow along. All right, so you guys are already familiar with the first of these terms. We have the ascending aorta coming directly off of the heart from that aortic semilunar. I'm going to take a seat. There you go. There, I think you guys can see that a little bit better. So first off, we have the ascending aorta, and then we have the aortic arch. That should be familiar from when we covered the heart, right? Now, coming off of the aorta, or the aortic arch, are going to be three branches, and I don't have them labeled immediately on this one because I have it labeled on the other, so let me grab the other for real quick so you guys can see quite clearly what our labels are going to be. Okay, there you go. Hopefully you can see that okay. I wrote it pretty small, so definitely check out the photos. Okay, so again, we have our ascending aorta. It's hard to do this backwards. Oh, we fell off. There's our ascending aorta. There's our aortic arch. Remember, we have three branches coming off of the top, and this will be familiar from when you guys were labeling your heart before. You saw there's three branches coming off of the arch. Going from his right side to his left side, we have the first branch here as the brachiocephalic artery, which we'll talk about in a second. The second one is going to be the common carotid. And then the third one coming off of here, so I'm going to take off aortic arch so you guys can actually see. And the third one coming off of here is the left subclavian, okay? So the significance of these. For that first branch coming off, we have that brachiocephalic artery like I just said. So that brachiocephalic artery, you guys might recognize some of those terms. Brachio meaning arm, cephalic meaning the head, right? The whole head. So the brachiocephalic artery, you might also seen somewhere called the brachiocephalic trunk. So that vessel actually comes up and then splits, okay? And then the names go along with these other two branches that you'll see on the aortic arch. So for example, we have this left common carotid that is next on the arch, and the left common carotid goes straight up to the head. So if you follow it along, go straight up to the head, okay, from the aortic arch. Off of that brachiocephalic artery, here's the right common carotid artery, because for every vessel on one side, you're going to have pretty much the same thing on the other side. So there's your right common carotid coming directly off of that brachiocephalic artery instead, okay? Here's that left subclavian again, the last vessel coming off that aortic arch. So there's your brachiocephalic artery, and here's your right subclavian branching off of that, okay? So don't be confused about the brachiocephalic artery. It's just the first branch coming off of the aortic arch, and it just comes up here and then splits to form that right common carotid artery and the right subclavian to either supply the head or supply the arm. Okay, so those are the branches that come off the aorta. Following it over still, the vessel as it first starts to go out towards the arm is called a subclavian, like I already mentioned. Subclavian, sub meaning beneath, clavian standing for the clavicle. Okay, so if you follow this on down, it's a little bit easier to see on this side, and then I'll show you on the other board as well. If you follow that subclavian artery on down, it passes through the armpit, and you guys know that the armpit region is going to be the axillary region, right? So it kind of just changes names. It becomes the axillary artery. Then it continues its happy journey down through the brachial region, so now it becomes the brachial artery. You guys should remember this from when we talked about how to take blood pressure and pulse points. That brachial artery comes down and then it splits. No surprise here. When that brachial artery comes down and splits, there's one that's going to go down the thumb side and then one that goes down the pinky side. Surprise, surprise, the one on the thumb side is the radial artery. The one on the pinky side is the ulnar artery. So it's not all that complicated for the arteries on the arm. And let me show you on the whiteboard as well, just so you can see. Here it is. And I have the same kinds of labels going on here. Again, there's our subclavian artery, and I'm going to show you on this side of the arm just because the vessel goes more straight. It doesn't twist at the bottom. So you can see there's all these other veins and stuff going on, but here's your right subclavian coming off that brachiocephalic artery. Here in the armpit, you have your axillary, oh, whoa, we can't even see, your axillary artery. As it goes down through the brachial region, that's going to be the brachial artery. Down around here in the antecubital region, it splits. There's one side that goes to the thumb, so that's going to be the radial artery. And there's one side that goes down to the pinky, so that's going to be the ulnar artery. So it's that simple in the arms for the artery. There's two other pathways to get to the head that I can tell you guys about. So I already told you about the common carotid, so just to show you guys here, there's your brachiocephalic artery, there's your left common carotid artery, there's your left subclavian artery, and you can see a little bit more clearly their pathways to the head. So we have the common carotids that go up to the head. We also have this extra little guy here called the vertebral artery. So you'll notice that coming off of the subclavian here, so this guy, this last branch coming off that aortic arch, that's going to be your left subclavian, and there's one branch, two branch, three branches coming off the subclavian. That second little branch there, that is your vertebral artery, and your vertebral artery goes up through the vertebrae, along the sides of that cervical vertebrae, right? It has those extra holes on the side. That's where the vertebral artery passes through. If you wouldn't mind handing me the clear skull real quick. Oops. All right, so here is the clear skull that has some of that vasculature. So you can see here's the skull, here's the cervical vertebrae, and going through the cervical vertebrae here, you can actually see the vertebral arteries right there. The other thing you can see on this guy is that direct route of blood we were talking about before. Here's your common carotid artery. The other route into the brain that I can show you pretty much only on here, it's not really on your boards, is something called the circle of Willis. If you look in here, I think it's the last term for your blood vessels on this particular list, but we're kind of talking about the head and arm. So here is our guy. I'm tilting it right now, and you can see here's the frontal bone, and then here's the sphenoid bone, right? Sitting in the sphenoid bone in the sella turcica is your pituitary gland, so hopefully you guys recall that from when we just relearned some of that stuff actually. And you can see that there's this vessel that surrounds the pituitary gland. That's going to be the circle of Willis artery, okay? So this is pretty much the one that I can ask you about. So we've talked about the head and the arms. Let's move on down the trunk. And once we move down the trunk and finish with those arteries, it's actually very similar for the veins, so it'll go quick. Okay, so let's stick with this guy for right now. All right, so we've talked before. We have the ascending aorta, the aortic arch, the three branches that come off the aortic arch to supply the arm and the head. Now we can keep going down. So behind the heart here, we have the descending thoracic aorta. So again, if you were to take that heart and remove it, then you would be able to see that descending thoracic aorta. And you can actually see that over here on our guy. If I take his heart out, which is, I don't want to do that, but we're going to do that. oh gosh, I'll just tip it up like this. But you can see behind that he's got that thoracic aorta right where I pointed with my pinky. Okay? Let's keep going. So going through the abdominal cavity, we still have the aorta descending, and this is going to be the descending abdominal aorta. The descending abdominal aorta, okay? Makes sense, named after the region, right? Now, coming off of the abdominal aorta, we have 3 branches to worry about. Just so you can see, actually I'm holding 3. The 3 branches to worry about, okay? So first off, you can see, I kind of use this as a landmark. You can see that we have these big old kidneys hanging out here, and we have these big vessels going out to them. So when you see an artery going out to the kidneys, that's going to be your renal artery. And I think, yeah, you can hopefully see that tag a little bit. That's going to be the renal artery. So that's kind of your landmark. That's going to be in the middle of the next 2 that I'm going to tell you about. Superior to the renal artery, you're going to have this little stubby guy sticking out right here, this 65 with a little arrow pointing at it. Hopefully you guys can see. Yeah, there you go. That little stubby guy, imagine that that's a vessel that's been cut. But that is going to be your superior mesenteric artery, okay? Again, superior to your renal artery. Down here, inferior to where your renals are, we have this little vessel here. I'm going to take off the tag so you can actually see. But we have this little vessel here that kind of is like laying over. See that? Like looking all lazy. That is the inferior mesenteric. Okay, so those are the 3 vessels that you got to know in the abdomen. You have to know for the arteries. The superior mesenteric, which is superior to the renal artery, which is, and then we have the inferior mesenteric, just inferior to that renal artery. Okay, cool. So the next thing that's going to happen, we have the abdominal or aorta coming down, then the abdominal aorta splits to eventually go into each leg, right? So coming directly off that abdominal aorta, we have a vessel that is called the common iliac artery. Whenever you see the word iliac, you should immediately be thinking about the pelvic region because that's going to be the name of this big old bone here, right? The ilium. So around that region, we have the iliac arteries. There's 3 different kinds of iliacs. So you have your common iliac. The reason why they call this common is it'll split, okay? So after it splits into 2 different kinds of iliacs. First, you can see that there's this one that dives deep into the pelvic cavity here. So that is going to be the internal iliac artery. Oh, I think I knocked out that label so you can't, oh no, it's there. There you go. Internal iliac artery on this inside guy. Either that or after that common iliac is there, it's going to split and continue down towards the leg. If it does, it is the external iliac artery. So in other words, the common iliac is this little branch right here that is common to the internal and the external. Okay, so common iliac, external iliac, internal iliac. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, now this is where we start talking a little bit about pulse points. So you remember when we talked about pulse points, how we have that femoral pulse point right around here, kind of near the groin? That's because the femoral artery starts as soon as it leaves that pelvic cavity. So that external iliac is going to continue down until it exits the cavity, and then suddenly it becomes the femoral artery. So you'll find that a lot, is that as soon as there's a branch, or as soon as the vessel changes locations, or something like that, it's going to change names. So knowing how these arteries kind of branch off of each other is really going to be super helpful for you for identifying. So we have our external iliac, and then that becomes our femoral artery right there. And it's going to stay the femoral artery all the way down until you get to the knee, all right? So I'm going to follow it with my finger. Femoral, 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 until you get to here. So you can see that this is behind the knee, right there. And you guys already know that region. That's your popliteal artery. And again, this is a pulse point as well. And if you look at our muscle guy, I just want to show you the same thing I just told you. You can see that here's the lower cavity. Oh, that's fine too. So you can see I've taken off the biceps femoris and also the semitendinosus and the semimembranosus so that you can see down in here we have the popliteal artery exposed here. Here's the femoral artery just above it. But here's the back of the knee. So that is going to be the popliteal artery. Okay? And I'll point out another guy in here that I'll show you also. So as far as the femoral and the iliac, you can actually see that on this really well too. So here's your abdominal aorta. Here is your common iliac. Hopefully you can see that okay. You can see the internal iliac diving inside. And here's the external iliac right here. And then as soon as that external iliac exits the pelvic cavity, it's going to become the femoral artery. So that's where you can feel that pulse. Like I said, it's a very superficial point here that you can feel your femoral pulse along the femoral artery. Sorry about that obnoxious noise, you guys. It's just like that sometimes.
The lab's burning down.
The lab burning down. We're fine. All right. So going back to this guy, here's your popliteal, which, like I said, you can see right behind the knee. Now, as that popliteal descends, the bone that they're showing here is the tibia. So most things that you're going to see after this are, the two things anyway, are named after the tibia. So that popliteal artery comes down and then it splits. There's one that goes behind the tibia and there's one that goes in front of the tibia. So no surprise, if it goes behind the tibia, it's the posterior tibial artery. If it goes in front of the tibia, it's the anterior tibial artery. Okay? So popliteal, split, posterior, and anterior, and then relative to the tibia. Okay? All right. This is important because this determines these vessels down here. So if we follow along that anterior tibial artery, it goes in front of your ankle, right? And goes down along the dorsal side of your foot. As you guys should recall, the region of the foot is either called the pes or the pedal, whichever you prefer. But you guys should also remember that your dorsalis pedis pulse point is like right here, right? So this vessel is your dorsalis pedis artery. And that, like I said, is descending from your anterior tibial artery. From your posterior tibial artery, if you follow that on down, you can see it goes to the bottom of the foot. And like I said, the bottom of the foot is the plantar region. So that's going to be the plantar artery. There's a medial and a lateral plantar artery. So in this case, you're looking at the medial side of the foot. That would be the medial plantar artery. Okay? So just to show you also on our 70s board, I'm going to put this up for a second. This is a long video, so I might do veins on the other video real quick. But just to show you real quick, it's still the same exact stuff. Here again is that ascending aorta, aortic arch. There's your brachiocephalic, common carotid, subclavian. Subclavian goes into the arms, the brachial splits to be the radial and the ulnar. That aorta descends behind the heart is the thoracic aorta, descending a thoracic aorta. Descends down here as well, becomes a descending abdominal aorta, over which you can find the superior mesenteric artery, the renal artery, which is here in the middle, and then the inferior mesenteric artery, which again looks like that vessel that's kind of laying down all lazy like. If you can actually see. There you go. Okay. Then that aorta is going to come down, it's going to split. Here you can see it's the common iliac. Hopefully you can see that. It splits so that there's the internal iliac and then the external iliac. That external iliac exits the pelvic cavity, continues down. So right here it is the femoral artery. It continues down its merry way. Oh, you can't even see. Sorry, guys. So there's your external iliac artery, like I said, and then there is your femoral. Starts right there. Femoral artery continues down its merry way. It becomes the popliteal artery behind the knee. Then it splits. One goes in front of the tibia and one goes behind the tibia. So posterior tibial artery, anterior tibial artery. And that anterior tibial artery is going to branch and make that dorsalis pedis artery. On this side of the leg, same ordeal. There's your femoral artery, popliteal. Here's your anterior tibial, there's your posterior tibial, and that anterior tibial goes into the dorsalis pedis, and that posterior tibial goes into the medial plantar artery. Okay, so this video was kind of long, so I'm going to do a separate vein one, hopefully that you guys will find helpful. So see you again in a little bit.